That was better than fabulous. It really was. And this is my first opportunity to celebrate the 4th of July as a citizen of the United States. So I've been thinking about this great country, and I want to know, are you just a little bit discouraged today? Do you think that we've lost our way, perhaps? Do you despair that we're ever going to get the government by the people, for the people? Or do you think that it's slowly perishing from the earth in favor of power elites who can buy elections and then do whatever they like? The Declaration of Independence, signed on July the 4th, 1776, has become one of the hinges of history, both in this world and in America. And these magnificent words this nation began: "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they were endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." You know, when this was first signed, things were perilous for the American experiment, and the signers knew it. John Hancock, who was President of Congress, was the first to sign the Declaration of Independence, famously writing his John Hancock in large letters and saying, "There, John Bull can read my name without spectacles. Now let him double the price on my head, for this is my defiance." And then he turned to the other members and said something every loyal American would love to hear more often in our present Congress. Whenever this country is threatened, he said, "We must be unanimous. There must be no pulling in different ways. We must all hang together." To which Benjamin Franklin quipped, "We must all hang together, or most assuredly we shall all hang separately." And some 76 years later, Frederick Douglass, an African-American orator, delivered a 4th of July speech in Rochester in 1852 titled, "What to the Slave is the 4th of July?" And he didn't mince words. He said it's with a sad sense of the disparity between us that I'm not included in this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice and liberty and prosperity and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that brought light and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn. To drag a man in fetters into the grand illuminated temple of liberty and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems was inhuman mockery and sacrilegious irony. The latest edition of Time magazine has got an article on the American dream by a guy called John Meacham. In it, he says that Americans have been cognitively dissonant from the very beginning. Instead of being consistent in terms of equality for all, white settlers drove the American Indian to the west until the tragic trail of tears culminated that drama. While white settlers dreamed and built, people of color were subjugated and exploited by the new rising nation. It was as if the great words of the Declaration of Independence had never been written. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all are created equal. This cognitive dissonance rose to a roar at the time of the American Civil War in 1861. America was a nation divided against itself precisely over this issue. We're all equal or not? And on July the 4th, 1863, Vicksburg surrendered to the Union. The news didn't reach President Lincoln until July the 7th. And word spread very quickly. At 8 p.m., with huge throngs in front of the executive mansion, Lincoln, who was in the War Department at the time, was compelled to respond and return quickly to the White House. Benjamin B. French, a highly regarded citizen of Washington, commented on the 4th of July oration he gave in 1870 that he just happened to be there on the White House grounds that day on July the 7th, 1863, when President Lincoln was elated at the news from Vicksburg. French said, We were celebrating the day in the President's grounds when the news of victory came, and I shall never forget the exultant joy with which it was received. The countenance of President Lincoln, never very demonstrative, look at your $5 bill, beamed all over this time with gladness, and the sun that rose day on many fears went down in the glorious idea that the Union was saved. Lincoln began to speak. Fellow citizens, I'm very glad to see you tonight. How long ago is it? 80-odd years since the 4th of July. For the first time in the world, a Union body of representatives was assembled to declare as a self-evident truth that all men were created equal. There were loud cheers at this point. This was the birthday of the United States of America. Since then, the 4th of July has had some very peculiar recognitions. The two most distinguished men who framed and supported that paper, including the particular declaration I've mentioned, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, the one having framed it and the other who sustained it most ably in debate, the only two of the 55 or 56 who signed it, I believe, who were ever to become President of the United States. Precisely 50 years after they put their hands to that paper, it pleased the Almighty God to take them away from this stage of action on the 4th of July. This extraordinary coincidence we can understand to be a dispensation, said Lincoln, of the almighty ruler of events. He went on, another of our presidents, 5 years afterwards, was called from this stage of existence on the same day of the month. And now on this 4th day of July just past, when a gigantic rebellion has risen in the land, precisely at the bottom of which is an effort to overthrow that principle that all men are created equal, we have a surrender of one of their most powerful positions and powerful armies forced upon them that very day. Loud cheers. And I see in the succession of battles in Pennsylvania, which continued for 3 days, so rapidly following each other to be called one great battle, fought on the 1st and the 2nd and the 3rd of July. On the 4th, the enemies of the declaration that all men are created equal had to turn tail and run. In the dark days of 1942, when the world was at war, the 4th of July was celebrated in America by Americans choosing to work all that day instead of taking a holiday, including the president. He saw very clearly that the American dream of life, of liberty and happiness was terribly threatened. And so he urged America to rise to the occasion in these words. For 166 years, this 4th day of July has been a symbol to the people of this country of the democratic freedom which our citizens claim as their precious birthright. On this grim anniversary, its meaning has spread over the entire globe, focusing the intention of the world upon the modern freedoms which all the United Nations are now engaged in a deadly war. On the desert sands of Africa, along the thousands of miles of battle in Russia, in New Zealand, in Australia, in the islands of the Pacific, in war-torn China, on all over the 7 seas, men are fighting desperately and dying to preserve the liberties and decencies of modern civilization. And in the overrun and occupied nations of this world, this day is filled with an added significance, coming at a time when freedom and religion have been attacked and trampled upon by tyrannies unequaled in human history. Never since it was first created in Philadelphia has this anniversary come in times so dangerous for everything for which it stands. We celebrate it this year not in the fireworks of make-believe, but in the death-dealing reality of tanks and planes and guns and ships. We celebrate it also by running without interruption the assembly lines which turn out these weapons to be shipped to all the embattled places on the globe, not to waste 1 hour, not to stop 1 shot, not to hold back 1 blow. That's the way to mark our national holiday in this year of 1942. When Rosa Parks was a little girl, she, along with every other black child, was forced to walk to school. And on her daily walk, she'd see a bus go by full of white children going to her school. And one day, when she was a mature woman, she'd had enough, on December the 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks, now 42 years of age, boarded a Montgomery bus to go home from work. And on that bus, and on that day, Rosa Parks unknowingly began a whole new period in American history, the renewed quest for freedom and equality. She sat near the middle of the bus, just behind the 10 seats reserved for whites. Soon all of the bus seats were filled, and when a white man entered the bus, the driver insisted that all 4 blacks sitting behind the white section give up their seats so that the white man could sit there. Rosa Parks resolutely refused to give up her seat. Her action happened to be spontaneous. When I made that decision, she said, I knew I had all the strength of my ancestors with me. She was arrested, of course, and convicted of breaking the law. Her action sparked a bus boycott, which went on for over a year as blacks across the city walked to and from work and school. The leader of the boycott was a relatively unknown, a Baptist minister, a certain Martin Luther King Jr. On the 4th of July in 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. stood up to preach in Ebenezer Baptist Church. And he said that the American dream is found in these majestic words of the Declaration of Independence. Words, he said, now that have been lifted to cosmic proportions. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they're endowed by God, the Creator, with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He says, it doesn't say some men, it says all men. It doesn't say all white men, it says all men, which includes black men. It doesn't say all Gentiles, it says all men, which includes Jews. It doesn't say all Protestants, it says all men, which includes Catholics. Yes, sir. It doesn't even say all theists and believers. It says all men, which includes humanists and agnostics. Martin Luther King achieved much for the American dream, but he didn't see the promised land, and neither have we. I want to suggest today that the American dream is inspiring other nations and peoples, but it's in real danger here at home. It inspired the Arab Spring, it inspired Tahrir Square, and it inspired Syria. People everywhere across this world want self-determination. They wanted life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as their dream too, as it has been ours. The American dream has always been in the hands of its citizens, and when it's threatened, it's always the citizens who try to put things right. There are 2 massive threats to that dream today. We're losing it to global climate change, and we're losing it to the problem of inequality in America. We believe in preserving equality of opportunity in this country, not that everybody should be equally rich. We know that a nation which does not have health care for all is an unequal nation. Thank God for the Supreme Court decision this past week, which is a first step towards universal coverage for all. We know that a nation with an ever-widening gap between the very rich 1% and the other 99% is an inequality that's going to bring us down. We know that many of the rich are rich without a conscience. They urge us to continue to exploit fossil fuels to create jobs in an ever hotter world, because so far their money has insulated them. In Holland, the rich and the poor have learned to cooperate together because they all live behind the dikes. If the dikes go, rich and poor go together. Well, it's time for us all to awaken. We're all living behind the dike of temperature. We're all in this together. We must learn to get along and dump our greed in the interests of the common good. Failure to do so is going to result in more wildfires, more hurricanes, more floods, more deaths, and dying than we can ever even dream about. In other words, the failure to implement the American dream of equality and life and liberty for all, and instead give these gifts only to the 1%, spells the doom, this time, of the earth itself. We've got through some very dark times before. We got through the Great Depression by pulling together and creating safety nets. We got through the Great Second World War by joining with allies. We're only going to get through global climate change by standing with the world behind the dike as one humanity. Challenge is massive. What we need is a Rosa Parks to challenge our assumptions. Someone who won't take it anymore. Is she here today? It's a solemn warning in the Declaration of Independence. We all need to hear. Governments are instituted, deriving their powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever a government becomes destructive of these ends, it's the right of the people to alter it or abolish it and institute new government. Well, this is what's being attempted in Egypt, in Tunisia, and Syria. Dying regimes always, it seems, resort to increasing levels of force. It's very sad, for in what they fear is their own salvation. And that's very sad. If we don't do something about the 99% and the 1% here in America, we will face revolution again. And it's not going to be pretty. Anything that threatens the American dream, which is now a worldwide dream, we must take it on. We will necessarily lose our happiness until we love the earth and each other the way we love ourselves. At a crisis in Jewish history, Joshua, a military leader, said these famous words, "Today I set before you liberty, life, and death. Therefore choose life." Sometimes choosing life over a fear-filled status quo can be very difficult, but it's the only way forward. Nadja Halilbegovich was a child who lived in Sarajevo, a city known internationally for its intolerance, and for its tolerance at that time of difference. But all that changed in 1992 when hatred and intolerance exploded into bullets and grenades. Barricades were set up throughout the city. Nadja thought initially that the violence would soon end, but it dragged on for years, and she thought then it would never end. An American family heard of her plight and were willing to host her in their home until she could get an education. So Nadja chose to dream about life in America. The only way out of Sarajevo was through a dank and airless tunnel. There was a line outside the tunnel of people, and grenades were falling within 20 feet of her as she and her mother tried to enter this tunnel. Mud and water dripped from above, and the whole tunnel smelled of urine. It seemed as if they were walking forever. Some people around them collapsed from sheer exhaustion or lack of air. Others would pick them up and carry the unconscious ones. Little Nadja began to cry. And her mother said, "Nadja, remember your dream." The end of the tunnel, bullets were exploding all around them, and her mother and her knew that snipers could see them. The walk was the longest of her life. Every time she faltered, her mother would say, "Remember your dream." At one point, Nadia looked around to see her mother was still alive, and right behind her she saw her, and her mother said, "Keep walking. Keep walking." 2 days later, Nadja kissed her mother goodbye as she boarded a plane to the United States, and there she followed the American dream to a better life. Her American family loved her, taught her, gave her a chance to live. Nadja said that life for her in America was easy, and that was all the more reason for her to be vigilant. She said she didn't want to take this freedom in this beautiful country for granted. She chose to face the past about what happened to her in her country. And she then took on the responsibility to try to teach others. When asked why she lived when so many others had died, she turned that question around and decided that the answer to that question was this: to take the responsibility of living for all those who did not live. She says that she pays attention on behalf of that small boy who lay in his mother's arms while she watched his tiny bloody shoelaces swinging back and forth as the mother ran. She listens now on behalf of the woman who was murdered in the street while she wanted her children to buy bread for her children. She says that if she can help other people understand the importance of life and liberty, and the need to turn away from the dark natures we find within us, then her wounds are going to heal. Are you discouraged? Do you think that we've lost our way? Do you despair we're ever going to get government by the people and for the people? Or do you think it's actually perishing from the earth? There may be a long dark tunnel for us ahead in America. We do have massive problems, but we have a history. In the darkest days, we've unfailingly remembered the dream. In 1956, the conscience of America stood up to speak in Washington, and he began his speech talking about a bad check that had been given to the Negro people. He said, when the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. The note was the promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He had a dream, he said, that one day freedom would ring from every village and hamlet, from every state and city, so that we would be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and women and white men and women, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, Muslims, Sikhs, the poor and the rich, would be able to join hands in singing the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we're free at last. Remember the dream and keep walking.